In 2016, under the Obama administration, the Pentagon promised people who identify as transgender that they could serve openly in the military. Then the Trump White House did an about-face. In April, a new policy by President Trump went into effect, barring transgender people from joining the armed forces. One soldier, Catherine Schmid, has struggled for 14 years to stay in the military. David Cloud of the LA Times Washington, D.C. Bureau tells her story in column 1. So tell us, who is Catherine Schmid? What was her backstory?
Well, Staff Sergeant Catherine Schmidt is a transgender soldier who grew up in Oregon and struggled with her gender identity her whole life. Even as a young child, she knew that she had feelings about wanting to be a female, even though she was gender assigned as a male at birth. She joined the Army 14 years ago in hopes of suppressing those desires, and lived a life, of privately, where she was a transgender person, but publicly in the Army, she couldn't afford to be that. So she lived a life as a male soldier and deployed to Iraq and all sorts of places. So she's had quite a struggle.
She tried so hard to suppress those feelings. She said when she was a little girl, she would wrap herself in a blanket and hope to wake up a little girl the next day rather than a boy. And after high school, married her high school sweetheart, a young woman, and then joined the Army and deployed and even became a father. She was a father of 2 little girls.
Yeah, she was living a life outwardly as a male soldier and a husband and a father, and was desperately trying, because of her upbringing, she says, to suppress her feelings about wanting to be a woman.
In 2013, she was in a very sad place that took her to the Tampa Bay Bridge. Would you tell us that part?
She'd been deployed in Iraq the previous 9 months, and had, as she said, had a lot of time to think. And sort of came to the conclusion that she could no longer ignore her transgender desire to be a woman, and came home and told this to her wife. And as you can imagine, it was quite a difficult period for her. They ultimately got divorced, and the trauma of losing her children led her to consider suicide. She, in fact, drove to a bridge in Tampa where she was stationed then, and thought about ending her life.
Then she calls the hotline, the military hotline, because she is obviously suicidal and gets hospitalized. They put her into therapy. She tells the therapist what she's feeling. And in your piece, it says that the therapist was going to out her.
That's right. I mean, there's in the Army, many people may not appreciate, they're subject to very strict rules. And even in a counseling situation, a therapist has to disclose to the Army chain of command issues that pertain to transgender identity, because at that time it was against Army rules to be transgender in the Army. So she was facing an extremely difficult choice, and ultimately decided to disclose it herself to her commander.
And she does in this very eloquent way. She writes a memo, she reads it, she's very careful. And in the end, her commander basically says, promise not to take medication or have surgery, and we won't kick you out. Is that what happened?
It is what happened. I mean, it's an interesting situation. Civilians might assume that the Army at that point was completely hostile to transgender people and to gay people. Don't ask, don't tell was still in effect. But in fact, as Catherine found out, the Army is a diverse place. There are some people who are certainly hostile to transgender people. There are also people who don't particularly care. And her commander was, in this case, kind enough to say, if you do nothing to treat your condition, to pursue changing your gender, then and don't live as a woman, at least at work, we will ignore it and let you continue in the Army.
And there were other people who were supportive, who invited her to Thanksgiving dinner when her family wasn't ready to deal with the transition. But there were also people who were sort of looking to catch her, surprise inspections, reporting her fingernails being buffed, right?
That's correct. I mean, she recounts a long period while she was still stationed in Tampa of extreme pressure, where senior non-commissioned officers who knew about her situation would subject her to snap inspections, try to find that her hair was too long, wasn't conforming to the Army standards for male haircuts, that, as you said, that she was wearing nail polish, which she didn't do. She does say she buffed her nails and that led to some sort of complaint. She also at one point posted a picture of herself off duty, in other words, not in Army uniform, with makeup on Facebook, which got her in trouble and in fact got her a reprimand. She was walking an extremely fine line, trying to live professionally as a male while also living privately as a female. So it was a difficult time.
Oh, yeah, it was limbo, right? After living in secret, now you're sort of in limbo. She ended up taking tiny steps. She changed her name. She married her spouse, who is also trans, you say. 2 months later, the Obama administration lifts the ban, and she proceeds and has the transition surgery.
That's right. I mean, she recounts when Obama changed the policy, feeling like after a long, many years of ordeal, she was finally out of the woods. That she could kind of openly live her life, change her gender, which she did actually at taxpayer expense. I mean, as others have done. She was one of the first to have the Army pay for her transition surgery. And so it was at that point, she was feeling like her Army career was safe and that she was safe.
And then the Trump administration yanks back and says, we are going to reimpose that ban. What is her future? What are the rules? I mean, she's already transitioned. They can't kick her out, right?
Right. She happens to be one of the few people who is actually in a relatively secure situation. The rules are the new rules are that you cannot be recruited into the military or stay in the military if you have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria and are receiving treatment for that. Gender dysphoria being questioning about your gender. And for Catherine, the situation is in some ways okay. She's gone through treatment and is no longer receiving treatment. So she, under the new policy, can stay. But there are many hundreds of transgender soldiers who are now vulnerable to be kicked out.
It'll be interesting. I know you found Catherine through her tweets, and she's pretty vocal, and you say she's funny and she's poignant. It'll be interesting to see what kind of messages, what kind of a voice she gives to that community, the 2,000 to 15,000 trans people estimated to be in our military right now. Thank you so much, David, for the story. It's a very touching and interesting and complex one. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.